Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's study. Before we begin, let's have a word of prayer. Dear gracious Heavenly Father, we invite your presence once again as we open your word, as we look at the history of Nehemiah and we compare it to the reforms that have happened in the past and presently. We ask, Lord, that you can give us wisdom, that you can help us discern clearly, and that you can lead us down the path that you wish us to go. Help us to follow and obey your voice. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so, Dwight, you sent me a list of dates dealing with the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. So we had a discussion about this yesterday, but you didn't seem to be available at the time. Can you tell me your thoughts about what we discussed yesterday, if you're there? Right.
Computers take a moment. Sorry.
Okay.
As we were discussing yesterday, the presentation that Stephen gave on Sabbath had some tie-ins with July 4th.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the time of the writing and the acceptance of the Declaration of Independence, one of the main protagonists was a man by the name of John Adams. John Adams became the first vice president of the United States and the second president of the United States. John Adams believed that July 2nd should be accepted as Independence Day and not July 4th.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a bit of issue between all of it. Now, in a second, I should be able to bring back up all of my notes.
Yeah, well, I have them here.
Okay.
Just share them. So you got, so July 2nd, because that's the date the Continental Congress voted to declare independence from Great Britain.
Correct.
But then the date that Congress approved language of the Declaration of Independence is July 4th.
Correct.
Well, why did they choose July 4th over July 2nd?
Well, the situation was that they felt that just the acceptance of the Continental Congress vote was not sufficient enough for the decision to take effect.
Okay. Yeah, so they're going to vote like we're going to declare independence from Great Britain. We vote that we're going to do that, and then 2 days later they actually have drafted the Declaration of Independence. So they approved the language. Right? Is that what that means?
Yeah, they approved the language on the 2nd. Now it's interesting on the biblical date.
Oh, on the 4th, you mean? On the 4th they approved the language.
On the 4th, Congress approved the language.
Okay. So on the 2nd they voted to declare independence.
Correct.
But on the 4th they actually approved the language
of the Declaration.
Yeah. So that means there was the Declaration was written on July 2nd, or they voted on that Declaration.
The Declaration.
Like, and what the Declaration, when was the document produced?
Oh, okay.
To me, it seems like the way that I would read this, just from what you have here, is that, they vote, we're going to declare independence from Great Britain on July 2nd. They haven't actually formalized how the language of that declaration.
Okay, the Declaration would have been written primarily by Thomas Jefferson between the 11th of June and the 28th of June of 1776.
Okay, so he wrote that earlier, before they even voted that they were going to declare independence from Great Britain.
Correct.
Then they would have seen that document and then voted on that document on July 2nd. But what does it mean they approved the language on July 4th?
Okay, the thing is,
I know you weren't there, but
really, I wasn't there. Okay. The thing of it was that as Jefferson drafted this, that the Declaration had to be reviewed before it was presented to the entire Congress.
Okay.
The Declaration was reviewed by what is called the Committee of Five. Two of those five were John Adams and Benjamin Franklin. So
obviously they have a Continental Congress.
correct.
Now, why did they form this Continental Congress?
Someone had to take responsibility for how the costs of the war were going to be compensated and how the instructions were going to be given to the army as to what was going to be necessary.
Okay, so when did they decide that they were going to have a war with Great Britain? Because obviously they're already planning to become independent.
So the initial portion for the Revolutionary War, which of course had been sparked because of taxation without representation,
Yeah.
began in 1775, and it was ended by the Treaty of Paris in 1783.
Okay.
But the British had surrendered at Yorktown in 1781. So you have a 6-year period during which the war was prosecuted.
Right.
Now, even after that treaty, Great Britain came back, of course, in the War of 1812. And a lot of that was because on the 18th of June of 1812, the United States again declared war on Great Britain because of the impressment of sailors and the interference of commerce.
Okay. Yeah, so we have the War of 1812, which is, so even though they had all this independence, we know that there is, because I know a little bit, because the War of 1812 is, going to involve the British Empire in the territory which later became Canada. Right? So there's some history I know sketchingly about that period.
Okay.
But okay, yeah. So one thing we can say is there's going to be a lot of dates, right?
Correct.
Now, I looked over these dates. I didn't see anything that particularly jumped out at me of these dates that you have listed here. You got like biblical dates and Gregorian dates. Is there anything that you noticed about these dates?
Well, of course, the 2nd of July of 1776 on the biblical date would be the 14th day of the 4th month.
Yeah, which I don't. So just the 144,000 thing.
And then on the 15th of December 1791, when the 10 amendments were ratified that became the Bill of Rights,
Yeah.
that was on the 19th day of the 9th month, but it was both that on the biblical and rabbinic years.
Yeah.
Now,
And they align.
of those, of
So
the,
19th day of the 9th month, is there any significance there?
I'm putting it out for consideration.
All I know is that when you put out a lot of dates, like, if you have something that has a lot of dates, you're going to find some numbers that are going to be similar to other numbers. So normally what I do is I look for like a structure, like, is there some kind of structure? Now, so I had done analysis previous to this on quite a few different things. One was dealing with the Great Seal.
All right.
Right. So let me see how I can bring this up here. This is a paper. We've looked at this before, quite a long time ago, though. So this is a paper I did on the Great Seal. Right. So I go through the committees and how the seal first looked and all the different dates. Right. So they had these different ideas for the seal. What's this picture? I'm not going to go through all of this, but you can see they have lots of different committees that they set up and how they do. I have that here where they talk about the final design, some rough sketches, and then so the various dates of interest. So on July 4th, 1776, they have a committee named to work on the Great Seal. So that's another significant thing about July 4th. And then March 25th, 1780, they get a second committee. And then May 4th, 1782, a third committee. These committees weren't very effective, it seems. And then on June 13th, 1782, Charles Thomson is chosen. And June 20th, 1782, the design is submitted and accepted. And then September 16, 1782, the seal first used by Thomson and kept in his care for 7 years. And then July 24th, 1789, President Washington asked Thomson to deliver the seal to the Department of Foreign Affairs in the person of Roger Alden, who kept it until the Department of State was created. So this relates to where Jeff was talking about the State Department when it was created and the seal, right? So I did research on it at that time. So this would have been 2019, maybe I put this together. I could look and see when I made this paper.
I think it's like 2018.
What's that?
Couldn't this have been about 2018?
Well, here I can just quickly check when I made this paper. I don't think it was 2018. It'd have to be 2019. I don't think it was 2020, but yeah, why is it not doing anything? I try to click on this, it's not. Oh well, I don't know. Okay, so then I have this little chart with the dates. So I know that I made this after we already had the calendar converter. So that would be 2019 at least. And then there's this period of time from July 4th, 1776 to September 16th, 1789. And that's a period of 13 years, and it's divided by 6 and 7 years. So that's the 817 days after they create this committee that you're then going to have this seal produced, right? So it's going to be made. So I did some analysis of that. So you got, how does that work? So what was that? 817 days after third committee set up, I think. Let's see here. Second committee, after the second committee's formed, it's 817 days. So that's like July 18th backward. 770 from that to the 5th day. So that would be the 4th day of the 5th month in 1782. Anyway, I'm not going to go through and analyze this. The main thing that I'm trying to say is that I put the dates on a line like this, and we got like the 4 committees there. So you can see there's 4 different committees that are set up. And then from the time that guy Thomson or whatever is appointed, there's 7 days to when he produces that seal, I believe. So you got Charles Thomson chosen June 13th, and then the design submitted and accepted. So when they finally just get one person working on it, it gets done in 7 days, right? So that's the 7 days there. And then they actually uses the seal on September 16th, 1782. Now, I had noted some things about this going back to Josiah Litch's prophecy, July 27th, 1299, the 26th day of the 4th month, to July 27th, 1789. So that is the date that's between these 2 other dates. So that's not actually a date that's on like in any of these dates. But July 21st, 1789 and August 3rd, 1789 are marked. And August 3rd, 1299 is the same as July 27th, 1299 as the Gregorian date. So it's going to be August 3rd, 17. Is it here? How does that work? I can remember how this occurred. So that's 13 years, but I can't remember what the August 3rd date. I think these are just symbolic dates with, anyway, so we get this 178,969 days to, if you have 490 years, and that gives you, see, remember what I did here, what this means. So what I was doing here, I don't remember exactly. There was some significance. That's the 69 weeks and the 62 weeks. That's what these days represent. So you get that from dealing with the 490 years So this is the Silage prophecy connected with the 70 weeks, right? So there's 483 years or 69 weeks to June 20th, 1782. And then you got the final week, which is 7 years, but then it's also divided into the last, you got 13 days that are divided in 6 days and 7 days. I know it's rather complex. I don't even remember all the details of it. We also had the 13 years here again with the different number of days. And so I'd work this in with the 25-20 and so forth, but I don't remember all the details of what I did there. My point being is that what we would have to do with these dates is put them on a line and see if there's any kind of structure, I guess, is the main point, which would take some time, right? So if we had like these dates in a chart like this, where we can see the spans between these different dates, does that make sense, Dwight?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, because to have a bunch of dates, like if I just had these dates, I can look at the symbols of the dates themselves. Obviously, 1782 has the July 18, 2020 numbers in it, but that doesn't mean anything by itself because obviously events happen in years that have those numbers, and that's not the primary number. 1776 is, you could say 1789 is. The 13 years there. Now, the 13 years becomes a symbol also from the 70 weeks, right? Because it's going to be 13 years from Artaxerxes' decree to Nehemiah's decree, Artaxerxes' second decree. So that was another thing that tied me to the history. So there are things about this history that tie us to this reform, right? We can see the 13 years in the making of the Great Seal and the setting up of the State Department has relevance as a period of reform in setting up the United States, right?
Okay.
That makes sense.
Okay, as a question from what I had looked at,
Okay.
when the Continental Congress voted to declare independence on July 2nd,
Mhm.
when we take a look at that to the date that the Congress approved the language of the Declaration, depending on how you want to look at it, you either have a span of 2 days or 3 days inclusive.
Right. Yeah. So it'd be inclusively 3 days. So you have symbols like that. So the point is, we can take this history and see in this history a connection with the reforms that occur with Ezra and Nehemiah.
Right.
Right. So we're taking this history of 1776 and onwards, and we're comparing it to our history presently with Trump, right? So
Correct.
Stephen has tied us together with these symbols that point to the 250th anniversary, in which Trump is the 47th president, and we can see that the 4th of July is related to the symbol 47. Plus, we have these other numerical connections that tie us also to the 70 weeks, and especially to the first part of the 70 weeks, the first 7 weeks, which I also have done in this history with the Great Seal, and this would just add to that. Now, God declares the end from the beginning. So here we have a period of reform with the United States, which we've already tied back to, the Civil War. First, we could say the first Civil War is when the nations are divided. That is, Israel is divided into North and South. So there's just so much history that we have connected with ancient Israel, with the Civil War in 742 BC, and all of that connected to the 25-20, and we've connected that history. So this goes back to the studies that Heidi and I had started dealing with the Civil War that led in 2019 for us to develop that even further. But we had initially that November 22nd prediction, which the whole purpose of that prediction was to see whether we could time set. That is, if we took the structures that we had, could we predict an event on November 22nd. And the reality is we could look back at it after the fact, and even then there was two different interpretations, Jeff's interpretation and my interpretation of November 22nd, 2018. Jeff continued to hold on to some aspects of that prediction, especially after the rebellion at Baal Peor, right? So with Parminder's group leaving, and brought in elements of, the Great Seal and things like that, which I then did a study on. So now we're looking at Nehemiah, and we're seeing a parallel to Nehemiah's history and to the history that's happening presently, which would be a history of reform, which ultimately fails, right? So we know we have, the 13 years from 457 to 444, and then we're going to have the 12 years that brings us to where the reform has failed, and there's another reform that's going to occur called, Nehemiah's final reforms. So there is something there. I just don't know how we're going to, there's a lot of detail here, right? I don't think in the study we would go through and put all these dates in, and we'd have to do that outside of the study into those matrix of dates, and then see if there's something in this structure. Does that make sense?
That can work.
Yeah, it's like Hung from Vietnam. He asks me questions all the time. Some of them are sort of spark ideas. Some of them, they just don't really go anywhere. But he asked about this, and I don't know how to pronounce it, a Cone event. Do you know what that is? Econe, with a bunch of accent markings on it. So I'm not even sure what those mean. Where on July 1st in 1988 and July 1st of this year, so 38 years apart, something to do with some rebellion within the Catholic Church. Anyway, he asked me this question, and so I just asked him simply the question, what is the relevance, and does it fit in with a structure, right? So we know that in order to pick a relevant event, so we know the American Revolution is a relevant event, but we're going to have lots and lots of dates, right? Because, sometimes you have almost every date, there's a major things happening. And then you have to say, well, which dates are really relevant? Like there could be a structure within, just like I did with the Great Seal. We can say, okay, here we have the Great Seal. There's a structure that relates to, because we know 1789 is 490 years after Josiah Litch's prophecy. So we've got 490 years that we can then tie to the 490 years of the 70 weeks, and we can see symbols that tie us to that. So you understand what I'm saying, that there can be internal structures, but we wouldn't just take just one date and just tie it, out of all these other dates. One of the things that Tess did when she came up with November 9th, 2019, that was, I could use the word deceptive, but I don't know if she was necessarily trying to deceive, but it did deceive people, is that she did something that you could do with a bunch of other events. That is, she's going to take things that happened in a year in which things happened, and then tie this to spans of time, taking like the 70 weeks, 490 years, and half of 490 years. But when you're taking a year in which all kinds of events occur, and then tying it to a year, and then she took a few events and took the November 9th date, she lined up that November 9th, 2019 was now connected to all of these different spans of time. Are people familiar with what she had done on how she arrived at November 9th? Because when she did that, I saw it not as relevant, right? So my problem with November 9th, when she presented it on October 3rd, 2018, is that it wasn't structurally sound. What she was doing was more sleight of hand than anything. Now, part of the problem that we have, and this relates to, I'm going to do a series on the principles of prophetic interpretation starting, I'm not sure, maybe this Sabbath I'll do the first one. But often what happens is we can look at dates and numbers and we can think that they're significant because there's some kind of coincidence of numbers. And sometimes those numbers can be significant. But then in order to understand their significance, we have to place them within a structure. Because if we don't have a structure, then we don't have a biblical narrative story that's tying it together, then we have no way of interpreting what those dates mean, right? And that the story needs to be consistent if we're applying it to the present, particularly. It has to be consistent with the story that's being told in the biblical narrative, right? Would we agree with that? That narrative is witnessing to the understanding of the events that are happening that they're connected to numerically. Now, sometimes that can be a chiasm, a mirror that's an opposite, like when you have like the Civil War in 742 BC and the Civil War in 1863, and the North is Confederate in 742, but the South is Confederate in 1863, right? So you have mirror aspects or details that can mirror them, but you wouldn't say that this period of reform, for instance, in the history of Nehemiah, because of all of the different witnesses, that somehow Trump is an anti-reform movement, right? Undoing some reform. We would have to say that it's like we see in Ezra and Nehemiah, we see a falling away, but then another reform, right? So that's pointing to a further reform. Now, so when we look at that we have the 13 years, right, between Ezra and Nehemiah, and then we have the 12 years. What is the significance of the 12 years from Nehemiah's first reform to his final reforms?
Didn't the first reforms kind of lay the groundwork and show the people what they should be doing, and then he had to come back and show them what they had not been doing?
Well, they had done it. So in the reforms in 444, those are pretty complete reforms, right? But then he's going to go back to Artaxerxes, and he's going to be gone for like however long, 12 years. And then when he comes back, the people actually haven't been following
Right.
what has been set up, right? So then he's going to have to do it again. So could we align that in any way with the past history of the United States, what Trump is doing as, in a sense, reflective of the final reforms, Nehemiah's final reforms? It is, we took Artaxerxes, right? And we're going to say, well, Artaxerxes relates to, his decree is going to relate to the 2300 days, right? So that history is going to be like Millerite history to some, because it ties to Millerite history at the end. And then we say, okay, now we take Artaxerxes' 2 decrees. Do we take Artaxerxes' 2 decrees and make them like 1989 and 9/11, or do we do something else with those? Like, how do we look at the repeat? So we got, or not the 2 decrees, but like we can say Nehemiah's 2 reforms. Are those going to be 1989 and 9/11? Or does the first and second decree represent 1989 and 9/11? And then Nehemiah's final reforms represent what's happening now in the history that we have with Trump as the 47th president. Now, there's another thing. Back when, oh man, there's so many ideas running through my head. So back when we had, before Trump lost the election in 2020, there was a group that was claiming uh, that we needed a 46th president. Like, I can't remember all the details because there was different groups actually with different ideas. But they were saying that Jeff was wrong about Trump being the last president, that they said somebody else was going to be the 46th president. They had a lot of wrong ideas. But we now have the 45th, the 46th, and the 47th presidents, right? So back then we just had the 45th president, and Trump was going to be the last president. We'd end with 45. But the argument they made was we had on the 1843 charts the 45, but then we also had the 46th, right? And so they just said another president has to follow, because Trump couldn't be, even if he got reelected, he wouldn't be the 46th president, right? He would just still continue to be the 45th president. So they argued that there would have to be another president that would be the last president. Now, do you understand the logic that they were using? But now we can see there's 40, the 45th, the 46th, and now the 47th, which is something they did not foresee. So we would have to say there's something to this that, in understanding Trump's reforms, because, Trump is a reformer, right? It'd be pretty hard to argue that he's not.
In this situation, though,
Yeah.
Trump is technically the 45th different person to serve as president.
Yeah, but does that matter?
That's part of the question, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think it would, right? To me, that, to try to tie him to the 40, because he's already the 45th president and the 47th. Right? So he now is using the symbol of the 47th, which is the 4th of July, right? That symbol is tied to him now, because Stephen's tied that symbol, and we can agree that that's logical. And, we had also noted, and Stephen had noticed this as well, but when he had we had the 3,760. How did we get that? Where did that come from? Trying to look back at these numbers, but some of these, my calculator's restarted. But anyway, we ended up with 470, and 470 ended up being one of these calculations. I can't remember which calculation it was, which also pointed to Trump being the 47th president, and also pointed to July 4th. So I think there's, to understand our history, where we are at, we're in the history of the 47th president. And the question is, are we in the history of Nehemiah 13? Like, is the story of Nehemiah and Ezra giving us our history from 1989 to the present? And so we really have to spend time. Yeah, okay, that's what it was. The 2,770 minus 2,300. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, so because he had minus the 2,520 and got the 250, but if we subtracted the 2,300, we'd get the 470. And so both of those tie us to, with the 2,520, and that's the number of adding up the dates of 457, 408, 27, 34, and 1844, adding them together to get 2770, which also gives us just July 27th, which is Josiah Litch's prophecy. So again, we tend to have the 70 weeks and Josiah Litch's prophecy tied together in these structures. Now, I know that's a lot of threads to kind of hold together in our minds, but so how are we going to approach this? How are we going to eventually draw out this line? I mean, I do have a temporary line, I guess, dealing with that, but so dealing with, well, it says Artaxerxes degrees, but also has the 12 years in there. But we got the 13 years, and then we have the 12 years. So we got basically, how are we going to create this as a line, what it means specifically, how we compare it to our history. We haven't totally decided on how to do them. We do have, also connections between 9/11 and the 354 years. So 9/11 tying us to April 5th, 2030, a symbolic date in the future. So I'm not really sure how we, the future keeps getting closer and closer together. Closer and closer all the time. And any thoughts about any of this? Just another a sort of whether this is significant or not. But if you count from July 4th, 2026 to October 8th, 2030. Now, October 8th, 2030 is 187 inclusive days after April 5th, 2030. So we have that connection that we've done in the past. But the number of days from this last Sabbath to that October 8th date is 1,557, which can be the first day of the 5th month in 457. It makes sense to people. Or I was just looking at the span of time between the July 4th date and this October 8th date. Now, the significance of that October 8th date is dealing with the 2801. So if you go 2,801 days from this October 8th date, I'll draw out a chart of this, but not right now. It goes back to my 60th birthday, right? So that's going to be February 6, 2023. So the distance between my birthday and October 8th is 2,801 days. So we've seen significance with my birthday as part of the lines. Now, there are some other points as well. Any other thoughts about any of this, of how we're going to proceed? What do we need to do? Because we have these dates here. We have dates from American history. I think we'd have to make a structure of, and when we connect events, like, obviously there's lots of dates. There needs to be a structure to the dates. That's why I'm saying when I deal with, for instance, the Great Seal, when I put it into a structure, so just to look at this again, right? So we can see that these are relevant dates, that they're not just different dates, they're the setting up of these committees, the picking of Thompson, and then you got 1,360 days, 770 days, 40 days, 7 days. Then you got 88 days, then 2,503 days, right? So you got these different spans of time, the 7 years and the 6 years, the division of the 13 years. Okay, so we wouldn't have to have something like that. And then we can take a structure and connect it with another structure if there's similarities in structures or similarities in symbols. Seems like a lot of work, how much of it we should do like live and how much people can do independently and then present it. And just another note, remember we had noted that 4,400 days. And then yesterday our study was study number 440. Just note that that's 1/10 of that digit. So we have to be able to discern when we're using numbers, how to use them properly and how to apply these structures and how to interpret them, right? That's the thing that we have to know how to do. And we know that we can't predict events in the future, right? Because people believe that they can predict events because they can see some kind of structure. Even if you have a date in the future, it can't be a prediction about a coming event, but it can give information about the present. So when we had April 5th, 2030, the main purpose of it was to show that we have an extended period of time, that we've made an application for an extended period of time to file our taxes, right? That's when we had looked at that. And a number of other things. But the idea was that the predictions that were being made about the imminent Sunday law under Trump were wrong because they weren't taking into account every aspect of the structure. That is, Colin had a structure but didn't complete the work, right? So he had a breach in the wall, so to speak, that needed to be repaired, which we ended up repairing and showing that his prediction would be wrong, which it was. Now, Trump coming back, we can see as the 47th, as a reformer, especially with the death of Charlie Kirk and the election of the new pope and all of that structure that we had seen. We now have this new structure as we're studying Nehemiah that ties us to this past Sabbath, July 4th date, 250 years after. So any thoughts on that? Like, what should we do with this? Is it significant to dig further? Where do we start digging? Are you guys burned out?
I think we're establishing that we're going to have to dig further.
Okay. Yeah. So we're going to have to dig further. So where are we going to dig? Now, we could continue looking at what Stephen presented and then try to see if there's more there. But you're going back. The thing that we often do is we go back to past histories, because past histories give evidence to help interpret present histories, right? So by going back to 1776 and trying to understand 1776, you provided all of these different dates, but we have to somehow sort through. And when I look at this, because I'm not an expert on American history, right? I mean, there is, okay, you're going to have the Continental Congress votes to declare independence from Great Britain. They're going to approve the language of the Declaration of Independence 2 days later. So we can say that's the third day, right? And then you're going to have more than a year later, the U.S. Constitution signed by 39 of the 55 attendees, all states represented except for Rhode Island. So often when we have the signing of the U.S. Constitution. Now there's the signing of the Declaration of Independence as well, or how does that work?
Correct.
Okay. So where's the John Hancock one?
Declaration of Independence.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Right. So is he the first one that signed?
No, he just wanted to make it so that his signature was so large that King George could read it without his spectacles.
Oh yeah. Maybe a bit to do with his ego as well, or we don't know.
No, I think he was the president of the Continental Congress at that time.
Okay. I just know that I know the name and the term and how it's applied. Put down your John Hancock, right? Sign your signature. Okay. So you have the Declaration of Independence is signed. Now, is it all signed at once, or is it also signed over time?
And I believe that they were all signed on the 4th of July.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Because that was what I was not certain of. But with the U.S. Constitution, not everybody's there. Or is it, because it says there's 39 of the 55 attendees sign it on September 17th.
Because there were many that didn't agree with the way that the Constitution was written. They wanted the Bill of Rights specific because they wanted to make sure that there was a limit on the powers of the federal government.
Okay. And do they then sign it later?
I believe that their states come back to ratify specific portions. I don't believe they signed it.
Okay. Yeah. And then you're going to have, so you have the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution itself, and then the Bill of Rights. Now you're going to have 17 articles of the Constitution approved on the first day of the 6th month on the biblical calendar, the 1st of Elul, which is August 24th. And then you're going to have on the 17th day of the 6th month, so 16 days later, on September 9th, 12 articles of the Constitution approved by the U.S. Senate. So you got 17 articles are approved by the House of Representatives, but then only 12 articles are approved by the U.S. Senate.
Correct.
And then the Congress also has to approve those 12
Okay.
articles.
So the way that it works
Yeah.
in America, the
Mhm.
House can draft legislation, but the House and the Senate, which comprise the entire Congress, have to agree that this is going to be something that they both want to see go forward.
So the House of Representatives and the Senate comprise the Congress.
Correct.
Okay.
It's like, okay, in Great Britain, you have the House of Commons and the House of Lords.
Okay.
How do you have it in Canada?
Well, we have a Senate and I don't know what you call it. I don't remember what they call it. To just have the MPs, members of Parliament. So you got the members of Parliament and Senate, but the Senate is just a rubber stamping thing. They don't really have any power.
Okay, well, the situation here, to understand the House and then the Senate, in the House, consider the House as a teacup, and consider the Senate as the bit of china that goes under the teacup.
Okay, the plate. Yeah.
The plate.
The saucer.
The saucer, thank you. Now, in many countries, you let your tea go into the saucer before you drink it. But basically, the House of Representatives is going to have the emotional weight of a lot of ideas, and the Senate must be more deliberative.
Rather the sober part of the American government.
Right. Now, when you consider what we're seeing in the House right now with Ilhan Omar and AOC and some of these others, the squad, you would not find them being members of the Senate directly because they're much more reactionary.
Yeah, in the Senate, are they often older?
Often, yes, but definitely more deliberative.
Okay.
So
okay.
by the time
yeah, okay, go on.
By the time you have these 17 articles that get passed through the House, they go on to the Senate, and 5 of those articles don't make it. So you wind up with 12 articles that are then approved by the U.S. Senate, and it goes right back to the House for deliberation. Can we accept what the Senate has done? And they decide, yes, we can accept this.
Okay, so 5 of the articles that the House of Representatives approved just are set aside.
Right.
You know what those are?
Yep, I do. So the situation that we deal with, like, okay, the second article, it took until 1992 before the second article that was promoted in 1789 finally became part of the U.S. Constitution.
What article was that?
It was the second. Just a second. See if I can pull it back up.
So that means they've added to the Constitution?
Yes, they've been adding to the Constitution ever since 1789.
So don't they have to do that in some sort of special way?
Yes.
Okay. Because there has to be a certain percentage of approval, and it has to specifically be addressing the Constitution, right?
Correct.
What do they call it when they do that?
They sent it out for ratification.
Do they have a special committee, or do they call it like a constitutional congress or something like that?
They would have at times a constitutional convention could be called, or it could be presented by the House and Senate and then sent on to the states.
Yeah, because the states have to approve.
Correct.
Changes to the Constitution. Okay, yeah, forgot about that part. We had something similar when it came to Canada getting its repatriation of the Constitution with Pierre Trudeau, Justin
Right.
Trudeau. And the provinces, all of them agreed except Quebec. So, so Quebec is not really part of the Canadian Constitution.
Okay.
So, but in the States, you couldn't have one state not accept something into the Constitution or the constitutional amendment go through or whatever. Everybody would have to agree. Every state would have to agree, right?
Well, there has to be a majority of the states.
So just a majority of the states, not all of the states.
Correct.
And then everybody's bound. Every state is bound as long as the majority of the states agree.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. So, see, Quebec isn't bound by the Canadian Constitution because it didn't agree. It didn't have to. If it didn't agree, it's just not part of it, which is really strange. So they still go under the British North American Act. Okay. So anyway, we have these articles of the Constitution. They have to go through. Now, then there's 10 articles ratified, accepted by the state as Bill of Rights.
Correct.
Are articles added to the other 12 articles?
They were part of the original 12.
Oh, so they're part of the original 12?
Correct.
Okay, so the Bill of Rights is just 10 of the 12 articles of the original 12 articles.
Correct. See, okay, your first article, and I'll have to pull all this back up. Your first article is yet pending as of 2026 because they never did accept it. The fourth article became part of the First Amendment. So it became part of the first of the Bill of Rights. The 10th article became part of the Fourth Amendment. The 12th became part of the Sixth. The 14th became part of both the First and the Sixth Amendments. The 16th article that was never used, presented, or ratified.
Okay.
So much of this had to do with how they were going to approach laws concerning legal due process. Now, like the First Amendment prohibits Congress from obstructing the exercise of certain individual freedoms, such as freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, or the right to petition. Now, we also spoke yesterday about the situations about how people could view the need for a law to be implemented for the worship on Sunday. There was a second email that I had sent up to you that dealt with what could occur. It is a video that is very short, but it reveals a situation that could be very catastrophic.
Yeah, so if there was a tsunami that hit the American East Coast, what would happen if the biggest tsunami ever?
Right.
But I mean, just because of there's so much low-lying land on the East Coast.
Correct.
Because I remember there was a flood back in dealing with some kind of hurricane back in, was it 2010?
2000, in 2005, we had the major floods that hit down in Louisiana.
No, I'm talking about the ones on the East Coast.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah,
But
so that was, yeah. Yeah,
we
the
are
ones in Louisiana, I remember because I was backpacking. And we came off of the trail and gas prices had skyrocketed. And so we asked if something had happened while we were backpacking. And they said, yeah, you never heard.
well, the situation that we have right now is that while we are very focused on how North Korea or China could launch a nuclear strike and how North American Air Defense Command, or NORAD, is so focused and watching all of these things, nothing is in place if a tsunami was to hit on the East Coast because they don't have anything to consider.
Yeah, though you don't, I mean, those would be a really low likelihood that you would have a tsunami on the east coast of the states.
Well, if you take a look at that email, it's not a low likelihood, it's a greater potential than they might think
Okay,
because of what's going on right now.
with what?
There's an island in the Atlantic that has a very active volcano right now.
Okay,
And basically, if this were to continue, this could produce a tsunami that could hit the East Coast within a very, very short amount of time.
because they don't really have anything there. They don't have any, or whatever they call them, seawalls and
Correct.
systems set up to protect against such a possibility. Okay. Yeah, so I mean, there's lots of things that can happen in the world that could be unexpected. I mean, you could have a meteorite and all these different end time scenario disasters that could occur. And we do know, because we have Bible prophecy, so we do know that there is going to be a time of prosperity in the United States, and then a loss of prosperity. And it's during the time of the loss of prosperity that the people call for the Sunday law. Is that correct?
That is correct. But the point that I'm making is that if if a tsunami were to hit the East Coast, that would wipe out Washington, D.C., damage New York, which is financial center,
Yeah.
and create issues up and down the East Coast, that would be the kind of thing that could lead people to saying, okay,
Yeah.
our our current prosperity has been ruined. We need to return to doing what we think God would want us to do.
Now, the problem with that scenario is the United States needs to be in a position that it can influence the rest of the world in a Sunday law. If the United States, if that happened, the United States would basically be wiped out as the world power, and that would just allow for other people to move in, right? So that would be the problem I would see with that scenario, seeing Washington wiped out and New York wiped out. I would think that the loss of prosperity would have to be more uh, based upon decisions that are made by the American government in a moral sense, right? But I could be wrong. But that would just be my guess from what I've read. See, because there is this theory out there. Because when we read Spirit of Prophecy, she does talk about this economic collapse. And I had friends back in the 80s and 90s, always looking for this great economic collapse to precipitate end time events. But they keep ignoring all the things that have to happen beforehand, right? That is, you can't take just one element that's prophesied about in the case of what these people would do and make that the focus of prophecy, that there's a bunch of other things that have to happen. And the one thing we've come to understand is that there is to be a religious revival in the United States, a true one and a false one, right? And the true one has never really been noticed by people in the past. They would always focus upon the false one because they're focused upon the Sunday law. But this true revival, I mean, that's the thing that we now understand that it's really come to light over the last couple of years, because back 2016, Trump gets elected. We're all on the idea that Trump's going to bring in the Sunday law, right?
A lot of people seem to think that. I don't see it. I have to wonder if Vance could be the one, or it could.
But I'm just saying, in 2016, that's what we all would think, right?
That's what a lot thought. I didn't.
You didn't, okay. But pretty much the movement did, right? Now then I started looking at Trump in 2017 and 18, and I started thinking, and especially after tests, I started looking a lot closer at Trump and realizing that what the media had portrayed about Trump was, pretty much fabrication, which is just a fancy word for lies, right? So they lied about Trump, and then you could start to see the motivations of what these different forces were involved. And so one of the things that I find Adventists do is there are some who focus upon the Catholic Church. That would be Daniel Fontenot. He always focuses upon the papacy, the Antichrist, right? There's other people who focus upon the New Age, right? So at different times in Adventism, you got different end time scenarios that are focused upon, the New Age movement and what they're doing, right? So what that would be the environmentalist movement and all those types of things. So, and then you have other people who would focus upon the Protestants, right? So that would be a focus upon, the moral majority and things like that. So you would have Adventists who had sort of had their favorite flavor of this Neapolitan sort of end time ice cream. But the reality is that all of these things work together, right? That there isn't a separate power that is just operating. Now we know that ultimately the one behind this is the papacy, right? So, Daniel Fontenot's view is somewhat, I think the more correct view, if you want to put it that way, except you can't neglect the other parts of the picture.
Okay, but the problem with this, if you've done a careful reading with the Spirit of Prophecy,
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to be the papacy that brings this forward. It's going to be Protestant America.
Right, exactly. So that's the problem that Daniel Fontenot has, is he looks at it as if like the Pope is the one going to be doing it, rather than recognizing, sure, the Pope's behind it. Ultimately, it's the papal power is working through various ways to bring this about, but it's going to be the United States, which ceases to be a Republican nation.
Well, in addressing the question that your friend in Vietnam had been asking,
yeah,
the schism that has begun to occur within the Catholic Church is more sleight of hand, keeping the view away from what are the Protestants approaching right now, because the Society of Pius X is a group that has been very adamant against the introduction of saying the Mass in the language of the country where it's being offered, as some would say, the vernacular. They want to see the Mass return strictly to being offered in Latin.
Yeah. Stephen has a comment.
Yeah. Maybe just tying in with the end time idea of disasters. So Ellen White, she talks about there's going to be thousands of cities being destroyed,
Mm-hmm.
one after another. On one city's being destroyed, it's a kind of mercy to the other cities, their time to repent. And we've really connected it to Nashville being, well, at least I have, to being like the beginning of these judgments. Because what people say, we thought these judgments were going to come, but we didn't think they're going to come so soon. So you get the idea that this is the first judgment. It's going to take place. Mm-hmm. And then Ellen White, she makes a comment saying that when one city's been destroyed, we're not to move in to try to buy property there when it's cheap. So basically saying we can still buy and sell at that there time. So the Sunday law hasn't reached a point where you can't buy and sell. So I'm just thinking this maybe it's three more likely. It could tie in with the tsunami destroying cities. But generally she says it's going to be one city being destroyed, and then a tsunami would probably wipe out numerous amounts of cities at one time. So I don't know if that's kind of,
Yeah. So there's a number of things that have to be considered. So one, when it comes to the Sunday law, we know that there's a progression of Sunday laws, right?
uh-huh,
And I don't think that that's often really clear, that we have a clear understanding of how those Sunday laws progress, because we know there's first one in the United States, and then we know, at least in my view, during the sixth plague, you're going to have the death decree Sunday law, right, which is going to be universal. So there's a progression of Sunday laws that occur, and there's also a progression of disasters that occur, right? And it's not clear to me in all of these years of studying exactly how that occurs, right? That is, I've seen thousands, well, maybe not thousands, that's an exaggeration, 500 different scenarios of that Adventists have, right? So they got lots of different scenarios. I've read through the years exactly, people line up these, how this Sunday law is going to progress, or what kind of events are going to happen first. And we know that when it comes to the cities that are destroyed by fire, Nashville is going to be the first one, right? That's the idea.
that would be my understanding.
That's my understanding there.
Now, kind of right.
Yeah, we also know that there's going to be disasters on the coasts, right? There's going to be all kinds of different disasters that occur. And these are going to progress in some way. Now, we know that the United States is the power that puts this first Sunday law, and that the other nations follow. But exactly how that happens, and those still are mysteries to me. Like I think some of these things we're given, we're given, just a brief picture, an overview, without all of the details being provided. Right. The main point that I'm trying to make here is that we need to recognize that there is going to be a revival in the United States, a true and a false. And that true revival is something we never noticed before. But we can see the parallel with Trump, that there's an opportunity for Americans on an individual level to be revived, right, spiritually. But that there's not going to be ultimately a true revival of the United States, because like Josiah's reform, it's going to fail, right? And so I mean, the main thing is to see that Trump is a positive force, not a negative force. And that's hard to get Adventists to see, because they continue to want to see Trump as a negative force. Whether it's going to be J.D. Vance or some other future president that's going to be involved, it's not the president who brings about the Sunday law, right? This is going to be something that happens because of the people. So we would see that there would be some kind of, not just opportunity for revival, but also that the United States is going to be, and there's lots of signs that the United States, that everything that Trump has done is going to put the United States in a position economically that they have not had for a long time. And so prosperity is going to happen. So national prosperity is followed by national ruins, or national apostasy is followed by national ruin, right? So there has to be some kind of apostasy. So you're going to have a revival, a spiritual and economic prosperity, and then an apostasy, which is going to bring national ruin. But also at the same time, there's a connection between that apostasy, which has something to do with the Sunday law and national ruin. But I've never been able to figure out exactly the mechanism that Ellen White's talking about. We've seen lots of speculation about different scenarios that people have, but other than just a general sense, I don't think we can figure out the details at this point. I think we have to pass through some more history before we see clearly what Ellen White's talking about. But I do think that we need to study it and look at the different possibilities. Otherwise, we won't be able to recognize these things when they happen. Okay. Any final thoughts? before we close with prayer. So thanks for that, Stephen, for that input. And I'm not sure what we're going to do tomorrow, so I'll try to prepare some stuff for that to see if I can take these dates and do anything with them. If there's some kind of structure. This would fit in, we got the Great Seal, and we have now the Constitution, all these different dates that we'd have to consider. Okay. No final thoughts to close? Dear Father in heaven, thank you again for the time that we have had here, for each person who joins in these studies and is interested in truth. And we pray for one another, for those that couldn't be here, for various reasons. We just ask, Lord, that you can bless them. Help us, Lord, to have good health, to obey the laws that you have given us to follow. And may you bring us together again to study these things, is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.